Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a little while since I uploaded anything like this. It's been a tough time trying to get a hold of a few people, but I have a very willing participant here with Dr. Daniel Winarick. And today we are going to be going over some of the differences between schizoid and avoidant, maybe talk a little bit about some of the core traumas or issues, and contrast and compare. I said it wrong, but whatever. And also, I want to bring up some topics regarding schizoid and neurodivergency, and I wanted to get a more professional opinion on what that could entail or what theories, could get mixed in there. In any case, Dr. Daniel, thank you for being with us today.
Sure. Thanks for
Yeah,
having me.
yeah, no problem. And by the way, they're one of the few people that actually reaches out and actually wants to contact me or talk to me when it comes to this stuff. So if anybody else out there is willing to, just know I'm here. I want to talk, and especially you academics out there. In any case, I want to start by mentioning your article or paper, or research paper, or what have you, called Toward Resolution of a Long-Standing Controversy in Personality Disorder Diagnosis, Contrasting Correlates of Schizoid and Avoidant Traits. And this was published, I believe, June of 2015. I'm sure since then you've probably had even more ideas and thoughts on it. And could you give us a little background on what it
Yeah.
was? And
Yeah, sure.
yeah.
So basically, you know, in the history of psychiatric diagnosis, there really never was an avoidant personality disorder until about 1985. Before 1985, there was just schizoid personality disorder, and that encompassed avoidant traits like social anxiety and rejection sensitivity, um, and other traits like eccentric or a bizarre appearance. And then in 1985, in an effort to kind of make things more measurable, they divided that into three different categories: schizotypal, avoidant, and schizoid personality disorders. And
Okay.
then there was kind of a debate in the literature that was a little bit heated and went back and forth, and some like letters, about whether this was a valid distinction or not, because some people, I guess the gist was, like, you have all these people who kind of present the same and share a common social withdrawal, isolation, and detachment.
Mhm.
But is it really valid to say that their motives for the social isolation differ so much that they should be considered, separate disorders, really, that don't have
Mhm.
much in common? Um, and so, I thought this was kind of an interesting debate. I don't know why, just kind of everything. It just seemed like a very kind of
Oh
clear cut
yeah,
question.
I can imagine it be interesting because like it's actually asking why, not
Yeah,
just what, not just like who and whatever. It's asking the why question, which is something that's often missed.
right. And so the DSM said basically that people with avoidant personality disorder kind of isolate and withdraw because they're afraid of getting embarrassed, rejected, or having a bad interaction where they're not wanted, but they have this strong need to belong.
Hmm.
Um, Whereas people with schizoid personality disorder were thought to like lack a desire, kind of categorically, potentially neuropsychologically, um, like an innate deficit almost, which, seemed a bit of a caricature at extreme. Like, I don't know if anybody truly, you know, has no need or desire for other people. I think it's more of a spectrum. But
Hmm.
certainly there are people with very low, you know,
Yeah, no, of
desire for
course.
social relationships. But
Yeah.
anyway, so I wanted to test, the validity of that distinction. And I did that for my dissertation, which was basically just given a bunch of self-report measures to college students, including measuring schizoid and avoidance symptoms, and then measuring stuff related to the desire for social relationships and rejection sensitivity. And, what we found evidence that supported the distinction somewhat,
Okay.
basically people with schizoid PD were way higher on social anhedonia, which is the capacity to experience pleasure from social relationships,
Hmm.
or the lack of capacity, sorry.
Yeah,
So they were,
I
more
can imagine.
schizoid in that sense, and
Yeah.
avoidance, had more internalized shame.
Mhm.
And the most interesting difference I thought was that avoidance had both an anxious and avoidant attachment style, whereas schizoids had just an avoidant, dismissive attachment style.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah, go
yeah.
ahead, sorry.
No, no. So there was evidence for that distinction.
Hmm.
But, since then, I have thought about more about it, and what I've been interested in is whether, you know, the two types of people differ in terms of their implicit or unconscious motivation
Hmm.
for social relationships.
Got it.
So, there may be differences that way, but I'll pause there.
Okay. Um, so I wanted to bring up a couple of things regarding that. So, in particular, so we can get a few details. What are some of the could you define like the differences between rejection sensitivity, abandonment sensitivity
Hmm.
or issues, and something that you would see more in a schizoid, which is it tends to look more of an autonomy related sensitivity,
Right.
and how those would differ.
Yeah. So I guess, an avoidant person, uh, may um, be hyper attuned to other people's judgments and nonverbal body language, or slight cues that they're not being totally accepted, or
Yeah.
any kind of new situation where they're kind of in the spotlight. They're particularly aversive to and worried about, whereas there's more of like an apathy um, with schizoid people. So you would see, and also more of an interest in sort of solitary activities for their own sake. So,
Mhm.
um, you
Would
know,
elaborate with for their own sake, would you?
like for pleasure.
Yeah.
So they're choosing to be alone because they, it could be like coding or some, I don't know, just watching movies.
Hmm.
There's a lot of, art,
Yeah,
um,
yeah, of course. But like you're
and
saying they would find more enjoyment out of those
more
things.
enjoyment. Yeah, more project kind of long-term focus. I think they're, sorry about that.
No, it's all
New York
good.
City. They're more systematic, I think, in projects.
Hmm.
Uh, Whereas in avoidant, um, it's more of a, you would think, an unpleasant experience if you're wanting social connection,
Hmm.
consciously, and not doing it because you're afraid of it. It creates kind of a vicious cycle of,
Sure.
you know, kind of self-criticism that you would think is more absent with schizoid people.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to mention too is there's often an overlap or kind of confusion that occurs, whether it's like in my own community or like outside of that or on the schizoid rate, wherever they talk about. There's often a lot of confusion between, say, a dismissive avoidant
Hmm.
and because somebody can have a dismissive
Yeah.
avoidant attachment style but not necessarily have an avoidant personality disorder, but somebody that
Yes.
would have a significant dismissive avoidant attachment style that's to the degree that's affecting their life significant, like to a very powerful degree, would be kind of a dismissive avoidant variant of somebody with that personality disorder. So I just want to know what you think are the key differences there and
Hmm.
why there's so much overlap. What looks the same and what ultimately is different,
Yeah.
because there's the
Well,
aloofness and things like that.
right.
Mhm.
Yeah, so aloofness would definitely be more dismissive avoidant. But the way I thinking about it is in a useful way is that if you think about it in like an X and Y axis, with the X axis being attachment avoidance, and that's just like the proclivity to avoid relationships,
Mhm.
detachment. And then the Y axis is anxiety. So you could have, four different quadrants there. You have high anxiety, high avoidance. You have low anxiety, high avoidance. And then you have the two low avoidance quadrants. So dismissive avoidance is the quadrant that's high avoidance and low anxiety.
That
Okay.
includes like neuroticism and stuff.
No. So
Okay.
high avoidance and low anxiety would be like low neuroticism. It's sort of the,
No, and that's what I meant. Like when you meant by
yeah.
anxiety, I meant like neuroticism would kind of fall under that. So somebody that's high anxiety would be more neurotic. or have more
Yeah,
neuroticism.
if you're right, exactly.
Yeah.
You could call the y-axis neuroticism
Yeah,
if
yeah. I just want
it's
to like
interchangeable.
clarify in my
So
mind.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So you could be, avoidant and neurotic, or avoidant and not neurotic.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so the neurotic avoidants are anxious avoidant
Mm-hmm.
attached.
Mm-hmm.
The non-neurotic avoidants are dismissive avoidant.
And just to clarify for somebody that maybe is less familiar, what are like the behaviors that,
Behavior.
yeah.
I mean, again, the dismissive avoidance would be aloofness, apathy, a lack of emotional expression,
Mm-hmm.
um, a lack of drama generally interpersonally, and maybe,
Mm-hmm.
you know, someone, seems a bit mysterious or enigmatic.
Yeah, yeah. And you could see how that would make somebody that is dealing with that or that knows somebody that might think, oh, that's schizoid too, right? They can be aloof, they can be
Right.
detached, they can be low in emotion expression, they can do all these things, right? So what is the difference there?
Between that and schizoid.
Yeah, between
That's a
that
good
and why
question.
they're doing it. Like why is the schizoid doing it?
Well,
Like or
I mean,
how
I
is the
think this,
schizoid feeling? Maybe.
yeah, I mean, I think that is basically the attachment style of people with schizoid
Hmm.
personality is the low anxiety and high avoidance. So I think that dismissive avoidant is an accurate way of describing generally the attachment style
The
of people with
generally the
schizoid.
attention. But as far as the personality disorder goes,
What
what?
may I think that's a tough call. What's the distinction between
Yeah.
their attachment style and their personality disorder?
Mm.
Um, I mean, I think uh, severity is one, and how kind of widespread in their life that attachment style is. Is it just, in their relationships with their
Mhm.
family and friends, or does it extend to like what they do for work and recreation? So you could imagine someone who's fundamentally avoidant and not anxious, but has a somewhat, socially interactive job or work where they have to have some like,
Got it.
reasonable level of social engagement versus someone who's like organized their whole life around avoiding that.
Avoiding other people essentially,
Yeah.
or most situations of that kind. Um, so just to get into a little bit deeper, so I had mentioned okay, so one of the core issues with even a dismissive avoidant is still, would you say, is still abandonment or rejection sensitivity?
So I think there's a difference between abandonment
Or
and
which
rejection
one would you say?
sensitivity.
Yeah, or
I think for dismissive avoidant, at the core is more abandonment
mhm.
concerns
Okay.
than constant, rejection sensitivity implies kind of
Ah,
you're
yes, yes.
sensitive to rejection from like anybody you meet,
Yeah.
regardless of how important that relationship is. Like an
Mhm.
abandonment concern seems more like fundamental to me and generalized
Yeah.
about people in general. And I think that that's more the heart of schizoid avoidance is sort of early developmental experiences. I mean, they don't have to be so early. It could happen really, later in life too, but
Yeah.
that leads you to kind of find an escape in your own internal mind and sort of, intellectualize, engage in, fantasy.
Mhm.
Um,
Would you say that because this is what I've noticed, and I just want your take. I've noticed that I see a lot less of a concern regarding abandonment in schizoids.
yeah.
Um, there's just like there's just not that fear that's generally popping up everywhere or talked about or so on and so forth. It always seems to be a concern with being engulfed and losing one's autonomy
Hmm.
to another person's needs, personality, emotions, obligations. A lot of the talk is I stay away from these things because these things are not rewarding. And also, um, there's a lot of obligations attached to it that aren't fulfilling to complete because there's nothing the other person is producing that I could actually find rewarding. And so it seems like senseless to participate in it. But also, the more emotional part would be when I am connecting or attempting to connect to people, people tend to like have these needs that make me feel like I'm being controlled. I'm being like eaten up
Yeah.
by their needs. And since I don't have those same needs, or I feel as though I don't have any of those needs, it feels really one sided and all consuming and such. Like,
I think that's a really accurate description. for the dynamic that a lot of people, have this profile, what they experience,
Mhm.
in terms of relationships or even like work obligations. I've noticed some people don't like to kind of be the person responsible for a lot of, you know, a growing list of somebody else's demands is really the fear.
Yeah, because that means you're like
You're being
you
controlled, you're
yeah.
being, kind of engulfed. But
Hmm.
right, so that does seem like the opposite, right, of an abandonment concern. You're not
Yeah,
worried
that's
about
what's
being
interesting.
abandoned,
Yeah.
you're worried about being found. Um,
Yeah, that's usually one of the issues that I constantly hear is like, I don't want to be perceived.
exactly.
When it's really
So
extreme, it's like, I don't want to be even perceived. When it's less extreme, it's more like, I just want to be left to my devices.
right. And so I guess the question that has come to my mind about that,
Mhm.
is whether or not, if you look at measures of unconscious um, needs to be engulfed or taken care of, or,
Mhm.
some people, it can be healthy to need other people to take care of you. And there's
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah.
ways to measure that, um, whether people with schizoid personality traits, would show unconscious dependency, has
Hmm.
always been a really important and interesting question to me
Hmm.
that I think gets to the heart of
Hmm.
debates about the diagnosis of
Yeah.
schizoid PD and its distinction. So I
So,
actually have looked at some data recently from
hmm.
um, my dissertation advisor, Bob Bornstein's lab. He's collected like, 500 participants over a bunch of years, took his measure of detachment and a measure of unconscious dependency.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to see if you could kind of separate people into,
Yeah, that's really good.
high
Yeah.
detachment, whatever. And it turns out that there are a bunch of people who have high detachment and low unconscious dependency.
Yeah.
That, and they, you know, seem to just genuinely or not, don't have that much dependent needs, and that sort of suggests there is a subtype of schizoids who are just sort of healthy and happy with their
I have yet to meet
isolation and
very
detachment.
many at all, to
Yeah,
be
no,
honest.
it
Like,
was a small percent,
it
but
must be a small percent because they wouldn't be on my server, I guess. They wouldn't be watching my channel. They'd be perfectly content and not worried about anything, I'm guessing. Because what's interesting is and another thing I'd like to parse out that I think you could be find interesting is sort of separating this detachment from relationships with people and
mhm,
it not being conflated with loneliness. I think a lot of schizoids are lonely, but
yeah,
it's usually in a more like I would say almost like an existential way. It feels as if they feel alien to other people. They feel um, unrewarded by things that people generally are rewarded by and motivated by. They feel disgusted or confused by like a lot of the things that people find very normal, very okay. And it's not really coming from, it's usually coming from like a place of like, this doesn't really make too much sense to me. Why do people like these things? And so on. Like, and it's usually that's kind of like the talk. I'd rather do this. I'd rather do that. And it feels
yeah,
as if the fantasy is like they wish there was like a form of friendship or
yeah.
partnership that exists inside their mind that doesn't exist in the world, at least to them.
One without obligation to
One with, yeah, less emotional dependency.
emotional intensity and dependency. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And so there's still that loneliness.
yeah.
I
I
ne-
agree, and I think that's why I was saying that they do have abandonment concerns, and I think you said it well that it's sort of existential and not specific,
Mhm.
but related to feeling alone and
It's funny
wanting
too because they hate
wanting to
that feeling often. Like they
right.
actually, I've talked to schizoids that basically like are ashamed or angry that they have that feeling at all because they feel like it's like, oh, I know I'm human, I know I'm a social animal, but I
Right.
wish I could remove that part because that part just is just hurting me, and I don't see a solution
Yeah.
that is viable, right? And so then it kind of becomes like its own little problem.
Yeah.
But anyway, I wanted to kind of move on a little bit here.
Yeah.
So, something I always bring up on my channel and everywhere is my thoughts regarding neurodivergency, specifically one that's much less categorized, but would probably fall into more like a schizo-spectrum. So some people that are schizotypal and things like that.
Hmm.
Um, this as we coined it, me and a good friend coined it, macro-associative. We came up with the word versus micro-associative, and
Yeah.
so macro-associative would be that kind of person. The micro-associative person would be more like the autistic person,
Yeah.
and the average person is kind of somewhere in between. But point is, how do you think that having a sort of cognitive style type, whatever,
Yeah.
would make it that much more difficult or that much more easy for some of the trauma or core issues that are thought that a schizoid would have to deal with or develop?
Hmm.
Like, is it, would you say, or would you think maybe is it easier for, say, an autistic person to develop this style of
Yeah.
detachment than a person that is not?
Well, I think it's definitely a good question. I don't know, what necessarily comes first or causes
Yeah, yeah,
the
of course.
other, but thinking about the cognitive and the personality is sort of two different levels of description for
Of
maybe
course.
some similar underlying thing. Um, yeah, I would say that there is sort of a unique neurodivergent profile for people with schizoid personalities. And it's not always the case. And there is also a unique cognitive style for ADHD and for
Mhm.
autism when you look
Yeah,
at cognitive test scores.
yeah,
And I think it's interesting to kind of put the profile for schizoid personality types to in that context to contrast them with what we know about other
yeah.
neurodivergent profiles. So, short in brief, there's also a condition called nonverbal learning disability, which is
Mhm.
somewhat controversial, but basically it's, when your verbal intelligence is significantly higher than your nonverbal abilities. So nonverbal abilities are like visual scanning, visual attention, mental rotation of like geometric shapes and stuff like that, versus, your ability to think about the meaning of words and make
Yeah.
connections in language. And so people with autism are generally much higher on their nonverbal intelligence, like
Mhm.
in terms of mental rotation and visualizing things in space.
Yeah.
That's why, I don't know, they're very good at Legos often.
Or whatever. Yeah, mechanical, system based,
Yeah,
mechanical things. I like to say concrete
right.
things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And nonverbal learning disability is the opposite. That's where you have deficits in those areas, but you're very good in terms of your long-term memory and
Mhm.
telling stories or understanding, why people do what they do.
Yeah,
Um,
more abstract concepts.
right.
Yeah.
And so what the research shows about schizotypal and schizoid personalities is that they show the deficits that you see in nonverbal learning disability often, which
Hmm.
is lower visual spatial working memory. So they're not showing the autism, you know,
Hmm.
profile.
Interesting.
Um, yeah. So I think that's
Based on what we have available right now.
right. That's what
Yeah.
we have available,
Yeah.
and it's a small sample, of people. That the research I'm talking about is probably people presenting at hospitals for research studies on
Hmm.
schizotypal personality or something,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
not everyone is into that.
Yeah, but which is really funny when it comes to this. I've noticed that the samples for a lot of these types of research are very small because they're, I would say schizotypal and schizoids are going to be the least likely to show up
In
for
any
any of this
sample,
stuff.
you're looking at like, wait, already you have to cut the
Yeah,
sample down by 75%, and then
yeah,
you've started like trying to find them.
yeah. It's really difficult. Finding them is going to be difficult. That's kind of like one of the things they're really good at not doing is being found. Um,
Yeah. And I should
the
just say there is a lot of comorbidity between avoidant and schizoid. So even
mm,
though they may differ in terms of anxiety versus apathy, a lot of
mm,
people have both at different times or even at the same time.
interesting. Okay. Other thoughts too. Let me catch my thought because you got me thinking about some interesting stuff
Well,
there.
my question for you is, do you
Yeah,
think
sure.
that the schizoids, the dismissive
Mhm.
avoidance,
Sure.
would they, even though they say they don't, you know, um, particularly enjoy or want intimacy
Yeah,
and strong emotional experiences. Do you think on some unconscious level that they do?
absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I think too.
I mean, well, when it comes to if you're talking about somebody that would be categorized like not schizoid but dismissive avoidant, I would say yes, they want. But I think the main difference, the reason I bring up neurodivergency is because I see a consistent trend in the work I do that a lot of the people that are believe themselves schizoid have often either thought they were autistic or have been diagnosed with some kind of autism at an early
Mhm.
age and then re-diagnosed with schizoid or vice versa. I always thought it was weird that those two things can't over like be the same because one's a personality disorder and one's a neurological difference.
Do you think they
Those
should be the same?
I don't think
Autism.
they should be the same. I think that um, we'll just say autistic people because there is no category for some of the other stuff that I talk about officially.
Yeah.
But I would say autistic people that deal with the trauma of growing up in an environment that is essentially not built for them,
Hmm.
and stack on top of that if that environment is already kind of poor or whatever. But that experience is there's different ways, different types of autistic people. And when I say autistic people, I'm talking about like high functioning, low needs type people.
Right, right.
Yeah, I'm not talking about like, severely.
No, I know.
And so those type of people will deal with that anxiety and that trauma and that PTSD or whatever you want to call it in different ways. Some will become like very, very like people pleasers because they're trying to basically like make the conflict not happen. So it becomes like a kind of conflict avoidance, but it's about that kind of barrier of communication and the conflict it causes. Right?
Hmm.
And so that kind of conflict happens at an early age. And I think that the schizoid is somebody that's like that, but they went the detachment, dissociative style
Totally.
defense. So,
I think conflict avoidance is 100% at the heart of both
well,
schizoid and avoidant
yeah, but the
personalities.
question then becomes, why? Like, what's the problem with conflict?
Well, it's probably different for each
Yeah.
person, but that probably some history where they were exposed to quite a
Mhm.
lot of conflict,
Yeah, of course.
just like overwhelming and swallow.
But what is the problem with the conflict? Like, what aspects of the conflict
I
are
think like aggression is probably at the
aggression?
heart of it. Yeah. I mean, that's
Hmm.
always been thought to be important diagnostically for
Hmm.
this uh, trouble experiencing aggression and trouble expressing aggression.
Okay. So I want your take because this is like I'm just telling you stuff that like I constantly hear, and I
Yeah.
just want your thoughts.
Uh,
So some of the stuff I hear is I stay away from conflict because it causes too many annoying problems and gets in the way of me just being left alone.
mhm.
I don't want to deal with the problems. There's like no emotional investment in the conflict itself. Like the avoidance, it's almost like
Yeah.
a pragmatic concern, even though obviously there's a
Well, it's
sense of
not.
emotion
Look,
there.
maybe it's not an unreasonable pragmatic concern if
Yeah.
your fear or ultimate concern is that if you do, maybe if you do get angry or in a conflict, like it will become immersive and almost uncontrollable. And
Yeah.
so if you don't want to deal with that.
Okay. I don't know. It's interesting because maybe I don't know if it's like an unconscious thing, like you said, but I don't ever hear that from them. That's not my personal experience as well. So I
No,
don't
I
know how
mean
much
you
of that.
wouldn't like if someone was theoretically like
Yeah.
afraid of their own aggression, they're not going to probably say, the
Yeah.
reason it's that, you know,
Yeah. I'm just trying to think because like I now because you brought in the unconscious stuff into this and that's where it gets a little like really dicey.
yeah, well, that's why I asked you. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
no, for sure. It's just so I feel like
look, I
oftentimes
think it's not saying
yeah,
if someone has verbalized that they don't want to get into a conflict because it will derail them. I mean, that's a pretty conscious acknowledgement of
yeah,
them wanting to avoid, aggression.
avoid aggression on the part of the other person, like is it
Un-
being aggressive to them?
well, or any of. I mean, I don't know what's in their mind, but there's aggression on the part of them feeling resentful of this person who they're going to have an interaction with if there's all these demands and
Yeah,
they're the other person potentially being aggressive towards them if there's a conflict.
yeah, 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 it's just so okay because I know like it's hard to parse out like what the person is saying and what is actually happening behind all the doors or whatever, because what they're saying is this is not going to produce anything of value to either party, and oftentimes they have no resentment. They just have a frustration, and the moment that conflict is avoided, that person stops existing.
Hmm.
um like they don't, there doesn't seem to be this kind of like bitterness of like, oh, I or frustration with, oh, I should have said this, or I should have done this. It's almost like they just want to get in and they want to get out because they have other things that they find more rewarding than any interaction, whether positive or negative. But negative ones tend to have more complications and more things and things you have to like deal with and navigate. And so what's interesting is that one of the ways they avoid schizoids avoid conflict is by just being agreeable in like sort of masking sort of ways. So it'll just be like, yeah, no, like somebody's like, you're wrong, you did this, and they'll be like, yeah, I guess I made a mistake, even if they know full well that they did not make a mistake, and they just kind of move on, because they rather just agree to
Right.
move on.
And
Um,
that's you commonly see that, in people who have been highly controlled in the past by other
yeah,
people.
that's what's
Yeah.
weird. So many schizoids come from like pretty well adjusted families. That's one thing
No,
I
you
found
never know,
really
but
odd. Well, yeah, maybe if they're lying or something, but
no, I
usually,
just mean like, a family can be functionally
mm,
intact
mm,
while,
I mean,
individuals in
I mean, emotionally well adjusted.
yeah.
It's weird. Like, that's one of the things that some of the schizoids I talk to concern themselves with. They go like, I don't get it. Like, my mom was normal and they were nice and supportive in a normal way, and my dad kind of was, or sometimes one or the other. But like, none of them did incredibly terrible stuff to me, but I could just never connect to them because the things they said, the way they showed me affection, the things they thought about me and concerned with regarding me were like totally alien or disconnected from my experience. And when I would try, one of the issues is when I would try express their kind of eccentric experience to the world, it would be met with conflict. It would be met with confusion, conflict, correction, and things like that. And that's why I brought up the neurodivergence thing, because that's an issue that a lot of people that are neurodivergent deal with and are actually often traumatized by throughout the course of their adolescence and growing up, and especially the teenage years, because that's when things become incredibly social on a more conventional level. And so this is something I constantly hear. It's I was when I grew up, I said things, I did things that were idiosyncratic or more autistic or whatever,
Yeah.
and they were met with confusion, conflict. No one was essentially able to comprehend what my motivations were, and so they tried to either fix it, or they called it, oh, they're going through a stage, or so on and so forth. And it eventually, yeah, there was more hostility in the teenage years because then, you're a loser, you're a weirdo. Why don't you care about these things that the rest of us care about now? Meanwhile, you're thinking, why don't they care about the things that I've been caring about since I was like a kid, which are the activities and the things? Like everyone moved away from all that stuff.
Well, like
Um,
what were things that the person was bringing to their parents that the parents then met with, you
well,
know,
if you want my experience, because I hear stuff like this, it just varies, but it'll be like, why are things like this? Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to care about this?
why do we have to go to so and
Why do we
so
have to
for
go to, yeah, why
Thanksgiving?
do we have to go to this party? Why do we have to go to church?
Sure.
Why do we have to like, and then the answers are never suitable. The questions are sometimes offensive to or
Yeah.
trigger sensitivities on the other people, and it's something that happens from like early on. It's
Yeah,
not.
no, I think those are honestly they're normal, healthy questions for any kid who's growing up who
Mhm.
wants to, who's kind of oriented towards pleasure seeking and being with family, or other people in a controlled environment. It's not the same as playing video games or hanging out with your friends or doing anything but, having to make polite small talk.
What if it's with their families as well? Because that tends to be
That's
the
what I mean. I
case.
think it's often with
Like
their
their
family.
mom, their dad, or
That's,
friends, or
the
any of that.
worst kind of forced small talk for a teenager. It's probably with
Well,
family.
yeah, but not all teenagers end up schizoids, right? And
Right, right.
so uh,
I think
I'm trying to
there
find
is
a
a I think there's a neurodivergent piece, and I think it probably looks similar to like a nonverbal learning disability
okay.
profile.
So you're saying it's maybe it's leaning towards something like that.
I think so. And
Mm,
I think it's also linked towards, like you said, conflict avoidance, which
mm.
manifests also
Yeah.
as agreeableness and also as passivity. And what I see also is a lot procrastination. Um,
What do you think the schizoid procrastinates?
I don't know. I wanted to ask you.
Um,
I think, I
well,
mean, I could make a theory about aggression, but
you like aggression, don't you?
I do. I mean,
Um, yeah, it's just so
people,
weird because like aggression, I haven't. Maybe that's my
right. I mean,
experience.
there's a psychoanalytic theory of procrastination that's like
Yeah. Okay.
someone
Well,
is expressing unconscious aggression by not doing the thing.
okay. Well, the lack of motivation to accomplish tasks or some is oftentimes tied to a cycle of being wanting to do a certain thing or needing to do a certain thing, and then the process of setting up to do it is interesting, but once it's going to be enacted, it oftentimes is unrewarding. So if it's something they want to do, they may procrastinate because ultimately they know at the end, or they feel as though at the end it's going to be not rewarding, and perhaps they're
Yeah.
putting away that part so that it doesn't come sooner. Another reason they procrastinate is because it's whatever it is just feels like a complete it's a type of productivity that they don't value or find rewarding as well. Like, so
Right.
an
Well, it's
activity
the
they
same
need to get done too.
rationalization that you
Yeah,
have to tell yourself to go to one of these parties that you don't want
yeah.
to go to almost. You know?
But once they get there, they don't even have to actively be aversive to it. It's just there's nothing there,
Yeah.
um, usually. And
And I
then
think
there,
also that when you're at a place, you go somewhere, you're kind of trapped. There, I mean, I think some of these dynamics are universal in people. I mean, I certainly have felt trapped and suffocated at a party that I didn't want to be at, and it may be even more intensified.
but at every party you've ever been,
No, certainly not. But I can
yeah,
see that that experience could, generalize for someone else or something.
yeah. No, it just seems to be the case because it's like, oh, like I went through stages in my life in which I thought, okay, and a lot of kids have done this where they're like, okay, it's time to do something different. It's time to do the human thing. And so they'll go to the things and they'll be like, all right, I'm going to put in my head like, okay, whatever's causing me not to be, and this is before they get their diagnosis or anything. It's usually whatever's causing me not to be able to enjoy this or do this. It's something, there's something wrong with me. I need to fix it because it's causing me problems or it's causing more conflict, and I need to figure out how to avoid conflict, but also be able to not be constantly drained by the
Yeah,
avoiding of it because it requires all this masking and dealing with stuff. And so they'll attempt it, and I've done it before, and they'll get there. And if there's like a mutual interest, like let's just say I go to some comic book convention, right?
right.
And I'm like, okay, I like to talk about comic books because I like comic books and stories and so on. But the moment the categories derail from comic books and it becomes about interpersonal connection, like other
Yeah,
people start wanting to be your friend because you have a mutual interest in them and they find you interesting, and so then that translates into their mind as I want to make you friend. For
yeah,
the schizoid it translates as, oh, I like this conversation. That's it.
right.
Because it's a topic I like to talk about and you seem to be enjoying the conversation. That's enough. That should be good enough. I find that satisfactory. But the other people do not find it satisfactory. They want to pursue further things that I have no interest in, and
Right.
it's
And
just
I think that's very threatening to some schizoid
well,
people.
yeah, of course, because then they get pulled in, right? And they also don't like hurting people.
Exactly.
That's another thing that's interesting. That's why the aggression thing is weird because
Well,
they're
that's
so
why the aggression thing is relevant too,
oh, okay.
because
Oh,
if you're, this is a very kind of theoretical
mhm.
perspective, but if someone is very, preoccupied about, trying not to hurt everyone, one theory is that they have a lot of aggression themselves, but they don't want to acknowledge that, and so
Mhm.
um, it just
Well,
comes out in different. It comes out in terms of
yeah,
their perceiving potential
yeah.
aggression.
Well, what's okay? Let me explain why I can kind of like push back on that a little bit because oftentimes the pain or the hurt they're afraid of causing other people is one that's caused by their apathy or their
Yeah.
inability to connect. So it's more like, oh, this person's going to try to attach to me now. I can feel it, and they're going to be let down because I can't provide them what they need.
Right, but
But if I,
there's an
yeah,
element of sort of grandiosity to that um,
hmm.
type of thinking. Like it very well could be that the other person is really not going to be all that moved either way. If the person is, apathetic, or they may think their rejection means of the person means more than it does, and
Oh
that
yeah, maybe I was thinking more like long term situations, but yeah, because there's oftentimes a history of that with a lot of schizoids, especially once they hit their 20. They've been in friendships or what
I
have
think
you,
so, and I
and
think
like
that's
that's so
part of
often.
I think that's part of the hard, you know, struggles of someone with the condition is that they've definitely had those experiences where their apathy has been, a problem and maybe caused someone a lot of hurt. But I think it's important for them to keep in mind that that's not everybody and not the way that everybody's going to perceive their personality.
No, that's fair. That's fair. But the likelihood, because there are people, you're right. I think it requires um, a high degree of openness and metacognition on the part of somebody that is not like this to be tolerant or be okay with somebody that is like this. Because oftentimes this kind of there's a lot of things you can't do to people that if you did to the schizoid they would be perfectly fine with, which is be honest about the current or the present interest in wanting to be around that person.
Yeah, I got.
So,
Hold on one second. I got to put you on pause for a sec
oh,
because
all good, all good, you do your thing. I'll
I don't know.
pause it too for a second
Yeah.
here.
All right. Thanks.
All right, we're back. We just had a little interruption. As my viewers already know, kids be like that sometimes to show up, and you got to acknowledge them and all that. And obviously,
Yeah.
and my daughter shows up every time I stream because that's around the time she goes to bed. So she pops in, says good night. I got to cover my camera for a minute, and then I have to jump back in. Everyone, I think my viewers have gotten so used to it, like no one really leaves. They're just, or they just like think it's funny because I
Yeah.
sometimes hear or she'll sneak up on me and
My
start
kids,
screaming.
it would be like 10 minutes of like questions if I.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, let's see what we can do here. We got to cut it short here, or we got to start wrapping up, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all good. I know that life.
I think we went for a while.
Yeah, yeah, no, we did actually. Yeah. Oh, now that I look at it, yeah, you're right. I think we went a good amount of time actually. Um, okay, so the last little thing, I guess,
Yeah.
that I want to like bring up. So it's interesting. You do believe there is some kind of neurodivergence involved. Uh, I'm guessing for at least as of right now, you kind of don't you think it's more about this nonverbal type
Well, I think that's
situation.
where you would see it if you were to do it cognitive testing on somebody.
Okay. So what why would hmm, do you think that being somebody that already has a significantly different cognitive experience would actually serve as a factor in making them feel that much more detached to the social world?
Yeah. Yeah. I
Like,
think it would intensify it. I mean, I think
yeah.
if your cognitive functioning is such that it's harder for you to interpret the meaning of nonverbal stimuli,
Mhm.
then that applies in the social world. And when you don't interpret it,
Mhm.
or have trouble with it, that makes the social interactions, it could be awkward. Often people, don't may not understand the same jokes or sort of points that are being made
Mhm.
because of that.
Um, yeah, I've noticed it's that, and also like oftentimes I think the intellectualizing is because they are, or the intellectualizing of social interaction is because
Hmm.
they're trying to navigate it,
Exactly.
and that's the only way they can really navigate it. And I think that's also part of the reason a lot of schizoids have a high degree of cognitive empathy.
Yeah.
Is and oftentimes they tend to have like these really kind of put together, built over the years, like ethical systems and
Hmm.
things like that, because they had to kind of construct things in a world that felt sort of alien to them for most of their life or a good portion of their life. They feel detached and disconnected, so they have to kind of like intellectualize and put it together, put pieces together and everything. But I am interested, and hopefully there will be more work done on it, regarding
Yeah.
the psychology, even psychoanalysis, and neurodivergent people, because I just really quick, I just want your take on this statement. I think it's somewhat absurd that we do not have a field of psychological study or psychoanalysis or whatever that is like a subset or primarily focused on the psychology of someone that is, say, like autistic. Because if their cognitive experience is that much different, that means their emotional attachments, what they prioritize,
Absolutely.
is completely different. So
There used to be historically a lot of writing on it, but it sort of became um, a little bit politically incorrect almost. Or I don't know why they stopped even thinking about the minds. You would think that's the right
yeah,
thing to do, but I agree with you,
it's a problem because a lot of the emotional issues, like there's a higher propensity within, say, autistic people, like for depression, anxiety. They have a higher suicide rate, all kinds of stuff. And um and a
Yeah,
lot of this stuff is sort of like couched as, oh, all these dysregulations, it's all autism, right? It's all just autism.
right,
And it almost feels like somebody that's autistic is not allowed to have a personality disorder,
right.
because of the way they behave or the way they deal with it, right? So if the way an autistic person would deal with trauma is going to fundamentally change their behavior, but it's also going to be the reason it's traumatic, what is traumatic about it, and how they interpret that trauma, and then how they externally exhibit it, is going to be very, very different.
Yeah,
So I just wanted your thought on, like, do you think that's something that well, you said there used to be something like that
I
more in the
do. There
past, but
used to
should that
be.
return?
I think it should return, definitely. And the way it was written, I think in the past has been very dense and not accessible to even me, really.
Mhm.
Um, so I think there's a much, you know, needed area to study in that.
Yeah, I mean, it could include ADHD, it can include other stuff, right?
And yeah,
uh
right. But just the psychology and
mhm.
sort of motivation and,
Yeah,
feeling of what it's like, I
yeah,
think.
the lived experience and how it changes it, and even the way they interact with the external world. And like 1 minute thing, schizotypal, do
Hmm.
you think it's or what do you think about schizotypal no longer being necessary, or the idea that it should be looked into as possibly a neurological difference and not just a personality disorder? Because
I think that, yeah. I mean, I think I actually don't know enough to answer that
yeah,
specific
yeah, it's just
question,
because
but it's an
autism
interesting
used to be
category.
considered like
Yeah.
a mood disorder or personality disorder in the past.
Yeah.
Eventually it got recognized as a neurological cognitive
Right.
difference, right? And that's why I always found schizotypal so weird, because there's so much of what they do and experience that is like cognitive
Cognitive.
distortions and
Yeah.
and everything else, that to call it just a personality disorder is just kind of weird.
Yeah.
It
And
would
I,
be
I
like
think
calling
I think
autism a
that
personality disorder.
yeah, I think there is a neural way of conceptualizing it as a, I don't know, a neurobiological
Yeah,
syndrome.
yeah. Because those people, the schizotypal people, are usually very macro associative. They tend to be the ones that are more interested in like this meta narratives and
Right.
big scope ideas that get
Definitely.
wrapped up in them, and they create their own little internal world in which like the rules just go out the door, when it
Yeah.
comes to what conventionally is understood by people. And I'm like, that sounds like a lot of what an autistic person would do when it comes to like why they just stick to their special interests and everything like
Absolutely.
that, because
I
it's
think
like,
there is a lot of overlap, and a lot of
yeah.
times people would meet criteria for both autism and one of these personality disorders, but you're not supposed to diagnose both
Yeah,
usually.
that's a
It's
big
frowned upon.
problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's so goofy to me. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for your time. Thank you for also, you gave me some pushback on my ideas, and thank you for being
Yeah.
cool about me doing the same.
No, absolutely. Look, it's an
Yeah.
unsettled question about the
Yeah, for sure.
validity of the unconscious aggression.
I
So,
know. And people really need to stop acting like it's a settled question.
yeah.
That's for sure. But anyway, thank you again. Thank you for being here. I'm not sure if there's anything you want to, did you think of anything you wanted to plug or mention?
No, I mean, I'm working on a research study
There you go.
test the validity of implicit or unconscious dependency needs in people with schizoid personality traits. So hopefully we'll have some
We don't
answers
have a
on that.
title for that yet, or anything,
Not
right?
yet,
No,
no,
okay.
no.
But well, so
But
stay tuned. Follow. Where can they follow you, just in case
you can
they're
follow
interested?
me on X,
Uh,
or on my website,
there you
psychologistsny.com.
go.
Psychologist plural,
Yeah. That way
NY.
they can get an update on if, like, say, it comes out one day, and like
Yeah,
they'll.
yeah, no, and there's also, content that gets published on my website
There you
regularly.
go.
Yeah.
So check it out, guys. Thank you, Doctor, and hope to see you in the near future.
Okay, great.
Oh, and
Bye
by
bye.
the way, people that watch, if you want to support me, Patreon, PayPal, whatever, it's always appreciated.